Today I'm talking about contact, searching, and the biological family. Even now, I hear stories from other adoptees who say that their adoptive families feel a sense of betrayal for the need that we have, the innate need that we have to search. So obviously, if you have an adopted child who is already in contact, that there is some sort of contact arrangement that has been set up, they won't have to go down the route of searching. And that might be a slightly different angle if they're already in contact. Doesn't mean that you don't feel a sense of betrayal. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me when I work with this issue is that word innate, it's just there, and it's not necessarily a reflection of A, your relationship, and B, your parenting. For me, that was one area that my adoptive family were very supportive in, the searching aspect. I was very lucky that my mum understood that that would be a need that I would have, and she supported me in every way that she could. But the understanding that I would have an innate desire to figure out who I am and where I come from, that was there, and she really supported me in that. And for that, I'll be forever grateful. For many of us, the fantasizing that I talked about briefly in my previous video starts really early. There's this kind of sense that the people who are around you, whilst you love them, whilst they love you, whilst you're all doing the same things, living the same life, there is a sense that there's somebody out there potentially that is more like you, that looks more like you, that behaves more like you, and it's just there. It's there from really early on. And for those younger children who have contact arrangements, as I said previously, it's slightly different, that they have the ability to see the person, perhaps, who gave birth to them, or they have the ability to see those similarities. For many of us, and for me that didn't happen for many, many years, but for many of us, it's a thought that never really goes away. I just wanted to read a passage from this memoir called Twice Born. Betty Jean Lifton, she was an adoptee, and she wrote this book in 1975. And at the time, I was 5 years old. And so it just shows how with the passing of time, this kind of stuff is just, it's there, it's within us, it's innate. You know, as we live and breathe as adoptees, these questions, they're just there. She says, "I will never see anyone related to me on this earth. Anyone who looks like me, shares my eyes, my nose, my mouth, my hair." I felt that for a really long time. Now, I wasn't part of an interracial or transracial adoption. My parents were white, but they had a tone to their skin, they had a darkness to their hair, they had darker eyes than I did and do, and there was just something about my environment that made me question more and more how I would feel around people that look like me. There are many people, myself included, who talk about when they have their first child, it's the first time that they ever clap eyes on another person who is their own flesh and blood, who looks like them, and potentially who has the same mannerisms. When I met my biological mother, one of the first things that we both commented on were our behaviours, the way that we touched our hair, or the way that we moved our heads, the way that we moved our mouths. So those kinds of things to an adoptee mean so, so much. And so I urge you as adoptive parents to try and understand and expect that if there's no contact in place, that will very likely be something that your adoptee will need to do. And I'm not really just talking about children. In fact, many children do have contact arrangements in place. But the relationship with our adoptive parents doesn't get less complicated as we age. So you might well say, well, my adopted child's an adult now. That they can do what they want. Well, they're going to find it very difficult to have this conversation with you, potentially fear of betrayal. So I just wanted to talk a little bit around how that is just an innate, inherent thing that adoptees have. Of course, there are other reasons, such as health and medical reasons, why you might want to know your genetic history, and all of that makes a lot of sense too. And I know that there are certain groups of adoptees fighting for access to birth records. Certainly in America, this is a big deal, and more states are getting on board with that. But just one example, for me personally, it took me many years to trace my biological father, and it was only with the advent of DNA that I was able to do that. By the time I had found him, he had sadly died, but he had died of complications relating to a very serious cancer that he had had in his childhood. I then discovered that I had a half-sister, and she had also died, very sadly, prior to my tracing them. And so just from the health perspective, I then felt that I needed to check out my own health, and with the knowledge that both my biological father and another daughter of his had died from cancer, it gave me more knowledge. We all talk about, as adoptees, we talk about this moment when you're in the doctor's surgery and they say, do you have any family history of X, Y, or Z? And you have to say no family history. And it's just another reminder in everyday, ordinary life of how we're slightly different, that we don't know where we come from. In terms of one of the findings from my research, which was around the need for open communication, this is one of the areas where that's really important. And for you to encourage those conversations, for you to start those conversations as an adoptive parent. As I said previously, my mum was really supportive in helping me find my biological mother many years ago, but we didn't have conversations about how it felt for me not looking like the rest of the family, how it felt for me when I remember one airport scene, and it really stands out in my mind. I was sitting opposite my mum, my dad, and my sister. As I said, we were all white, but they had very dark skin, very dark hair, very dark eyes, and that moment will be forever burnt into my memory because I just felt so different to them. And as I mentioned previously, I did have quite an identity crisis, and that's within same culture and same race adoption. So you can begin to imagine the difficulties of trying to adjust with identity, interracially, transracial adoptions. But the point is, I would have really welcomed a conversation around what it felt like for me to live in a household with people who looked nothing like me, that really didn't think that much like me, and that I just felt very different to. And so I would really stress the importance of open communication around this need for searching and contact. I think very often it's when choices have been removed from us that things become slightly more problematic. So I had no choice, I had to search. And many people who were adopted around my sort of time also had to search. They didn't know necessarily how to find their biological parents. And so DNA tracing has been an absolute godsend for those of us like that. And many people have scratched that itch, if you like, and then can put it to bed then and move past it. But it's the not knowing that's more problematic. And you might find with adoptees who do have contact arrangements that, yeah, they get to a point where actually they maybe think, well, I don't actually have that much in common with that person, and but at least they have a choice, they have an informed choice, they can make a decision about what to do with that relationship. So all I would say is encourage that conversation. It's so vital to your adoptee. Issues of belonging, they affect us in our relationships all throughout the rest of our lives if not handled. And as Betty Jean Lifton says in her book, the waif in me is euphoric at belonging to a group at last. So the point is, those thoughts are not going to go away just because you're not talking to your adoptee about it. In fact, they'll just get bigger and darker and more powerful within the adoptee, along with a sense of betrayal and guilt. So it's so important that you open up those conversations and just say, so how is that for you? What must that be like? I'm going to be sharing many more insights on adoption generally. As you know, I'm an adoptee, adoption researcher and psychotherapist. And so I'll bring some anecdotal content to my videos, but also heavily based in the research findings, the need for open communication and the need for all of those things that I mentioned in the video about the findings. I hope you find this helpful so you can get the absolute best out of the relationship with your adopted child.